So let's talk about the second half now and Liverpool's very important changes, including going 3 at the back.
Yeah, so Steve Finnan came off at half-time, you know, whether that was an injury or whether he was just saved from what was going on in the first half, we can debate all day long. And obviously they'd already brought on Vladimir Smicer earlier in the game for Harry Kewell after his injury, which helped them out. But they ended up as a back three with Carragher, Hyypiä and Traore playing as a back three, which, as Andy was talking about in the first half, then gives the protection with Alonso of Didi Hamann. And that midfield two changed the game. So there's Smicer then moved to the right-hand side of midfield. Aherne was playing on the left-hand side. And that gave Gerrard and Garcia the licence to get up with Milan Barros and made them a much more, you know, there were two sides to it, made them a more defensively solid without the ball and gave 3 players the licence to be going forwards without leaving their mates loads of work to do behind it. So it was a very clever change that Milan didn't react to.
Do you think Liverpool made this change to stop leaking goals, or do you think it was a tactical change that would see them get forward?
I think it's a bit of both, because we've seen there, as Dean was saying, the protection for Alonso in Hamann, but as well is playing into the strengths of Smicer, who we know has got incredible athletic power, and Shebahn Aherne, who is a left-back who's not massively keen on defending. And it's all about the physicality, the runs he makes. And really, if you think Liverpool's only chance in the first half was a Shebahn Aherne shot that was charged down, if the more he can get into advanced positions, you know, it's like the best form of defence being attack, isn't it, really? So when you're talking about stemming the flow or trying to get yourself back into the game, I don't think it's an either-or, really. I think by giving Milan something to think about, immediately that changes the balance of the game.
It did, and also gave Gerrard, like you say, that space, that bit more freedom to then go on and get 2 goals.
Yeah, what was really noticeable for me as well is, again, it's something I talk about a lot, is unselfish runners. And Luis Garcia did an amazing job here where he got into a really unselfish position in there, which makes the back four of Milan unsure of who's going to pick him up. And when they're playing with an attacking right-back like Cafu, that then gives him a decision to make. Do I stay and double up into mark him, or is that the centre-back's job, OK? So there's an element of indecision there straight away. And that meant Risa has more space because Cafu hasn't gone out to him, automatically hasn't gone out to him like he would have done earlier in the game because Garcia is making that position difficult for Cafu. That's where the cross comes in, and that's where Steven Gerrard gets into that position in the box where he wasn't getting in that position in the box in the first half, and the ball wasn't coming in there in the first half. So they've solved the problem very quickly, and then all of a sudden you change the game when a goal gets scored and the indecision comes into it for Milan.
Yeah, and there's so much for Cafu to think about in that situation because it's not a Milan team with natural width, really. Apart from him, it's a fairly narrow team. Now, they're able to boss the centre of midfield and the centre of the park so comprehensively in the first half that doesn't really matter. The fact that Kakara's got liberty to go there, wherever he wants, maybe even more if I could control the stick a little bit better. It really doesn't matter that they don't have that width. And, very little of what they do is actually in those wide areas. In the first half, is less what Kaká does, apart from creating the chance that leads to the free kick for the early goal. It's more the fear of what he can do, really. So the fact that he's placed down an early marker to say, at the time, Cafu is so different from... He changes the position of right back. He's a historic player in that sense. And early on in the final, he says to Liverpool, well, I can end up there, I can end up there, I can end up wherever I want, and you're going to have to think about that. And he puts in their minds exactly what it is. And that is part of what creates all this space in the centre.
Just focusing more then on Steven Gerrard, Dean, the fact that he gets himself almost into the striker position, shows the work, the mentality that also he had in that game.
Yeah, and real bravery considering what happened in the first half. Because again, as Andy said, if we put Barros in there a second and we bring Gerrard into where he was in the second half, then in the first half, I know this is the second half formation, but in the first half we were talking about this level of space in between Liverpool's midfield and attack, which Kaká in that horizontal space gets this enormous area to work in. And so Liverpool, by going into this position here with 2, pushing the defenders up and then in there. Immediately, they've compressed that space in there, which gives them less space to be in, and also enables Gerrard to be running 30 yards vertically up and down the field, not 60.
Yeah.
And so that then is a massive change. But yeah, you've still got to be, as we know Gerrard was, an incredibly brave, athletic, energetic player to think Reece has got the ball, I'm going to put myself in there, because if the cross doesn't come, I've got to get back again and be chasing Kaká and Gattuso and Seedorf back up the pitch again. So yeah, enormous credit to think we're not just going to save ourselves from embarrassment here. And that, you know, we've watched the documentaries about the game afterwards, and they talk about the dressing room and say what was said, and it wasn't a mentality of don't lose this 6-0, lads.
Yeah.
The mentality was the next goal. And that was what it gave them, and the bravery of Gerrard gave them that.
And part of that is actually, it's not about being this team in this fight, it's about being Liverpool in a Champions League final, isn't it? That sense of we have to rise to this moment. Look at the fans who've come with us. This is our natural habitat while we're wearing these shirts. But I think the interesting thing about Gerrard and what an incredible influence he has on this final, and particularly this second half, this really sort of had the potential to be his Jude Bellingham in the first year at Real Madrid kind of season, if we're looking at it in a current context, I suppose. Because you look at Barros, and there are so many of these players in this team that you don't think this is not a natural starter for a Champions League winning time. I mean, look, Barros had a decent career, but I don't think many people that would argue that he's an A+ elite kind of player. And because of this, and you talked, Dean, about the unselfishness of Luis Garcia here as well, but I think that's doubly the case for Milan Barros. His work is to keep the centre-backs occupied and create the space for Gerrard to come into. I mean, there are times where he ends up almost in a centre-forward position. Like, he scores the goal from more or less on the penalty spot. He drifts into that space that Barros has helped create. The work that he does enables the room for those runs, really. And when you look at like other better periods of Liverpool, so Liverpool go on to become a better team under Rafael Benitez, they go on to challenge for the Premier League title and they get pretty close. Gerrard is still Gerrard, but he's never this Gerrard again. I think this is a particular season where there's a vacuum, because if you go right back to the start of the season, Michael Owen goes, Djibril Cissé, who's been brought in by the previous manager, Gérard Houllier, he starts and has a reasonable start to the Premier League, and then he has that horrendous leg break in October against Blackburn. Fortunately, he comes back and plays his little part at the end of this, as I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later in the penalty shootout. But he's still gingerly finding his way back. So they don't have the sort of centre forward that you would expect Liverpool to have.
Okay, you mentioned what happened in that dressing room. The message was the next goal. You know, it could change everything. What happened in AC Milan's dressing room, and why didn't the changes come sooner when they started to concede?
I think they started to plan the party afterwards at the half-time break. Probably they were probably deciding which restaurant and bar they were going to end up in, because they did take a very, very long time to adapt to what was going on. And also with the penalty incident was a really big part of it as well. Before we get to extra time and penalties, but you know, Andy just said about the Gerrard movement there, and if when they get into this position here, Liverpool, they're occupying players, and this is Seedorf in this position here, and they're occupying players, right? So all of a sudden they're man for man, and it was Jamie Carragher here who found himself with the ball in this position, and again, bravery from a player to go into that area there as the right centre-back when everybody else is picked up, and he's the one who plays the ball into Barros to win the Gerrard overlap, which leads to the penalty. But that doesn't happen if you haven't got that belief. And all of a sudden, you know, the tables have turned, and you know, we've all seen games like it before where all of a sudden, a 100 million player looks like he wants to go and sit on the bench because the atmosphere has changed. And by that stage, it had really, really changed. But AC Milan got complacent, I think. I think Ancelotti was far too slow in changing and adapting his system to that of Liverpool's. Maybe there's an element of arrogance there, that we are the best team and we don't need to change for them. But they actually did. Yeah,
they did. What should Ancelotti have done at that moment then?
Well, I think it's interesting when you look at Ancelotti and why he's such a relevant coach still now. It's because he's a man in his 60s who, unlike most of his contemporaries, like say take a Jose Mourinho, he doesn't, or even a Jurgen Klopp, he doesn't sit there and talk about his philosophy all the time. He's someone who's very player-led, and that's why he worked so well at Milan for such a long time, because he's got Silvio Berlusconi at the time saying we should play this way, being in his ear, being the most powerful man in Italy, and he's just got this calm where he just says all the time, I trust the players. I doubt he said very much to them at half-time. You know, it's, I guess, the ultimate manifestation of that, you know, keep doing what you're doing. Because he trusts them, because they've been here so many times before, because they were the European champions in 2003 and because they were the Serie A champions in 2004, he knows that they can deal with pretty much any situation. So what happens to them in that 5 minutes in the second half is so unprecedented that rather than him thinking, right, I'm going to take control of this, that's not his personality.
Right.
He believes in empowering his players to do that. And because of that, as Dean says, he leaves it a little bit too long. Because you look at the options he has on the bench. If he wants to help out the defence, he can bring on Kaka Kaladze. If he wants to give something a little bit more in possession so they can try and wrest control of it back from Liverpool, they've got Rui Costa, who they can bring on. They have got absolutely tons of options. First substitution they make, 86 minutes.